Welcome in, race fans, to yet another edition of In the Dirt. This is your host, Webb Dillard. And we've got a pretty decent show lined up for y'all tonight. Calling in here shortly, we're going to have Zach Clark, one of the announcers from over at Arklatex Speedway, where I spent the weekend covering the Pelican 100. The winner, Jesse Stovall, has agreed to come on and talk to us about the race, about his victory, and about his program and how it's on the upswing. So without further ado, let's bring in one of my co-hosts, and I bet you will never guess which one it is.
Is Brian Gray not on yet?
Brian Gray is absent.
Is he?
That's not cool.
Hey, is Jesse Stovall the guy that was leading the Bama Bash last year and got caught up in the wreck? Is that the same guy?
Same gentleman altogether, 00 out of Missouri.
I thought so.
He put on an absolute clinic, brother. I'm telling you. He was gone. He was G-O-N. There wasn't no E on it. He was just G-O-N.
What color is his car now? It ain't yellow anymore, is it?
Nah, it's black and red with a white 00, and
yeah.
Well, he's going so fast though, it just looks like two white orbs. It's not really zeros.
Blur.
It's like a white and red blur. Looks like a frog in a blender. So what's going on in Kyle May's world while we're waiting for also too, before we get started, at 6:15 we're going to start with Red Vogt. He is the son of the legendary Red Vogt, who, and we'll let Red get into it, but his father was around when they had this thing, an idea called NASCAR. So that'd be cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's going on in your world, Kyle May?
Well, since Friday, I've worked on a race car every single day, all day.
Wait a second. That sounds like a complaint.
No. I'm pretty happy with it, actually, but I'm complaining because tomorrow I got to go back to work. And so.
Okay, I see where you're going. I see your complaint lines, yeah.
But Friday I worked on the LMG car and kind of found some problems that we'd overlooked at times, and then
was it the nut behind the wheel?
Yeah, well we've gotten down to that. That's the last nut we've got to tighten up. It's just we haven't found a wrench quite big enough yet. But anyway, we worked on it Friday. Then I worked on my daddy's car Saturday, finished up the body on it. Then the boy I was telling you about that bought my old race car, we worked on his yesterday, trying to get him fitted for it, because he's like 6'2", 350, and when I drove it, I was 5'4", 150, so it was completely different. And the guy that had it in between, all he done was change seats, so there's nothing really different. So had to do all that stuff. Then I went today and pretty much got the OMG car ready. Just got to put it on the scales and weigh it out, and it'll be ready to go. Hope we get to go somewhere before the Crate Nationals, but I don't know. We kind of put the super speedway setup on it, I think. So we may not do too good in any short tracks. I don't know yet.
I felt
until we take that setup off.
I felt like yesterday that I set a kind of a minor land speed record myself.
Really?
Yeah, I made it from Shreveport, Louisiana, all the way back to Rainbow City in 7 hours. And I waved at the cops when I went by. It wasn't like I was trying to avoid them. I was like, "What's up, dog?" And they were like eastbound and down. I was like, "I'm loaded up and trucking. Let's go." All right, let's welcome to the program Mr. Zach Clark from Arklatex Speedway and Mr. Jesse Stovall, the champion of the 2012 Pelican 100. Gentlemen, how are you this evening?
Pretty good. How are you?
Zach? I'm still recovering, Jesse, from the I had an 8-hour drive home myself, and it was still recovering.
Yeah, I'm the same way I am. I made it to Mena or something, Arkansas, and then woke up 3 hours later and headed on home. And I'm still in recovery mode today. Matter of fact, I got the car washed, and I got a race here this weekend, so we're still got to roll on, but still trying to get caught back up.
Now, my co-host Kyle May he's a young driver from here in Alabama. He asked me as the show started. He says, "Is that the same Jesse Stovall that was leading the Bama Bash and got caught up in that accident?" And I said, "The very one." Tell us a little bit for the local people here, what you thought about Green Valley and what you were on your way to a victory, but what you thought about the Speedway and such.
No, that's a kind of a high bank bull ring of the South, I call them. I think there's that track there, and Columbus. Even down there, Vivian, that place is kind of banked up there at the top. So I don't know if it's something just in the South or what. But it's about the only place I've ever seen banking like that. And that place down there in Alabama, when we was down there in Alabama, that you'd haul the mail around that place. And we were running good. And, I was running about like I was running there at the Pelican. Just kind of half, 3/4 of what I really could. And just trying to keep every the guys at bay. And, I knew the guys behind me were running pretty hard. And, I headed down the back straightaway there, and I seen that wreck happening, and I'm like, okay, it's time to take the base of maneuver. I just couldn't slow down. I mean, that track carries so much speed that, I think even Ray Cook, he was further on behind me, and I know he's a good driver and probably seen what was going on, but, just the wreck pretty much covered the whole track, and there was nowhere to go, and it collected me and him, and I think several of the top 5 drivers in that race at that time. It collected us all up there, and unfortunately took us out of the race.
Well, we certainly don't want to revisit the bad times for too long. This weekend, right. you were the class of the. Now it was a small field. There was like 27 cars.
Do you guys hear me?
Yeah, is that Zach?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm old now. I mean.
All right, hold on a second.
Good deal.
So back to the.
I think all weekend.
I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that for a while. I don't know what that was. All right, back to you, Jesse.
Yes.
The field, about 27 cars, but there wasn't a slouch in the field. And I think that's been the story of the year, that the tracks aren't getting the car counts, but the cars they are getting are quality. Talk about some of the competitors that you just, you outran everybody there. Talk about the field and what it meant to win there at Arklatex.
It is always good racing. It's good competition because it raises the bar on yourself. You got Bub Cool and Chris Wall and those Childress cars and Jack Sullivan. Some of those other guys that were there. There was probably of 27 cars, there was 17, 18 cars that had a good chance of winning that thing. And maybe more than that. It was a pretty good field of cars and it makes it even better to win when you're winning against, the caliber of drivers like that there was there. I'm saying? Billy Moore Jr., I didn't mention him. He was there, and I think he was going to be he's probably going to be a threat until he got taken out. I'm not sure, you can say woulda, coulda, shoulda all day long, but, I feel like his car was, me and him talked a lot, and we probably each got our own little secrets, but, our cars were pretty close to the same there. And, I felt after we talked after the heat race there, he was about as good or better than I was. I don't know where we're at on the watch, but, sometimes you can be just a tick better than somebody. When you get to them, you still got to pass them. You got to be a lot better than them to pass them sometimes, or wait for them to make a mistake. And, that was what I was concentrating on the most through that race, was just don't make a mistake. I got the lead early, and usually that's a bad thing is leading early. And I thought, just hold your line, don't make a mistake. If somebody gets around you, then be patient again, and maybe you get another run at them with 10, 20 laps to go.
Now,
so I paced myself there as much as I could.
Yeah. Now, typically, when you're out there and you got that kind of a lead, drivers hate to see cautions, but even Bub McCool said that he only really one time had a shot at you on one of the restarts. I mean, you were just perfect just about every time on your restarts. I mean, was it one of the best cars you've had, the best setups you've had in a while? What was the difference? And it was a 100-lapper at that, so what was the difference? How did it all come together?
I think the cautions came at the right time in that race. Sometimes you get them big 50, 60-lap runs, and I don't, maybe I'm not in good shape, but that'll wear on a guy. You get kind of, it's just kind of like going around and running around, and it gets monotonous, I guess. And I don't know what the right word is for it, but you kind of almost forget what you're doing. I do. Maybe it's hard to I guess I may have a little ADD or something, but I lose my concentration after a little while. And, having them cautions let me sit back and think what was going on, what needed to be done. And, like that would have been like 330-some lap sprints that we had there. And that just made it a lot better for me. I know, on those restarts, I didn't realize how good a restarts I was getting until I actually watched a video last night there. Those restarts, I guess it was killer. I thought they would be right on me, but the car was restarting good. The car would turn and rotate through the center of the corner so well that I knew they were going to have a hard time getting me on the bottom. But I was worried about somebody making that lucky, wild move around the top, or there was a little moisture actually through the middle still too towards the end of the race. I was worried about somebody kind of getting a one lap run there after your tires cool down and getting out there and getting around me. But, once we got taken off and got there on a good, 8 or 10 laps into it on a green flag, I was pretty confident of what I was doing and just hitting my marks and making all the moves I needed to make, the right ones.
Well, all right, before we let you go, what's on the horizon for the Stovall race team, and thanks some of your sponsors?
We're probably going to run the Mars MLRA race here at home this Saturday at Springfield. Then a couple weeks down the road, there's a big race there in Muskogee, Oklahoma. We're running it, but it's pretty much regional stuff. We'll probably go topless, show me 100, and there's some talk, maybe about going to the Dream or the World 100 or something like that. There's talk of some other bigger races that are further away, but we'll have to see where we're at in this points chase. Because we're probably going to chase one or the other. I don't know which one. We'll run them both up to the time it splits and then see, kind of evaluate and see where we're at and go from there. But I couldn't do none of this without all the good help I have. Steve Russian kind of got me back in these late models, and Fred Bishop is my car owner, but he's like a family member more than anything. He supported me in the modified deal. And we done a modified deal for a year, and then Russian kind of wanted to race late models, and I've always loved late models, so I did that last year with him. And now, Fred, my car owner Bishop, decided that he would go ahead and take the leap and buy a late model, and I actually bought the late model from Russian that I raced last year, and he's just second to none. I can't say enough about him. He gives me what I want, or gives me what I need. I've got. As far as contingency sponsor, Performance Bodies, Integra, Billy, he helps me out a bunch. He's not really a contingency sponsor, but, Billy helps me on parts, and even Chris and the guys out at Victor Circle, they do a lot for me also. I also got Al Humphrey. He's a guy that's raced for a long time, and he's been going with us to some of these bigger races, and his knowledge and him keeping me calm and level-headed is just unbelievable how much better it seems like I perform when I stay level-headed, and him being there and being a part of that, I think, is helping. If we could have this team all together and him not live in Nebraska and me live in Missouri and Fred live in Oklahoma, I think we'd be really dangerous. But unfortunately, we're several hours apart there, and it's hard for us to get together every time. But I'm sure we'll be together as much as we can, and it'll be a good year, I hope.
Well, Jesse, I really appreciate you joining us here on the program. I enjoyed, even though I work in the media and shoot video now, I enjoyed watching you kick everybody's tail over there at Arklatex. So I wish nothing but the best for you in 2012, and we'll probably call upon you, go and get another big checker flag, and we'll have you on again.
That'd be great. Thanks for having me on, and it was great being down there this weekend. Thanks a lot.
Jesse Stovall, the 2012 Pelican 100 champion. When we come back, we will have Little Red Vogt, and he will talk to us a little bit about the beginnings of NASCAR on In the Dirt. All right, race fans, we're back here on In the Dirt. Kyle May, old Stovall's a pretty good dude, sounds like, huh?
Yeah, he seems pretty cool.
Hey, he's just, a lot of these guys are just, laid back, and when you approach them to do something like this, they're like, really? Me? And those are the guys I really like. Now, yeah. I wish everybody was like that.
Yeah.
So let me introduce our next guest. Fix and bring him on, Mr. Red Vogt, son of the legendary Red Vogt. Now this guy is going to tell us one heck of a story, I'm telling you. And let's go ahead and bring him on, Mr. Red Vogt. Welcome to In the Dirt. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing fine. I'm doing really well. I appreciate your welcome, and I'm very glad to be here.
One of my co-hosts is AWOL. We don't know where he's at, but Kyle May is with us. He's a young race car driver, just young, 20 years old. Red, what advice do you have for a young 20-year-old race car driver?
Well, the best thing to do is just get out there and do your laps and watch the guy ahead of you and watch the mistakes he's making and try not to make the same mistakes. And when you make a mistake, don't worry about it because it's a learning process, and that's what it's all about. It's having fun and learning, and every lap you take is a next lesson in the process.
And when all else fails, jump the concession stand.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Red. I want you to enter. Okay, we'll ease into this whole the beginnings of NASCAR. But introduce yourself and explain to everybody exactly who you are and who your father was.
Well, fine. Actually, I'm known probably around the racing world as Red or Little Red, and I got that moniker because I am actually a spitting image of my father. Those of you who may have seen the bronze statue in the Racing Hall of Fame, and then if you looked at me, you would see that we are practically identical. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, of course, and I'm going to tease here a little bit. I used to talk like this, actually. I really did, and I get my old accent back when I travel around, and then I got a speech coach when I became an actor up in San Francisco years ago, and was coached into speaking this way. I grew up with my family, of course, in Atlanta, and we were quite wealthy during the early years because of all the bootleg money that was coming in. And I have an older brother who's 18 months older than I am, but he never had any interest at all in racing or automobiles in any way, shape, or form, although he wound up getting a degree in aeronautical engineering from Auburn University and went on into the nuclear energy field. But he never did have any interest in racing, but you couldn't keep me out of it. I was raised in military schools. My first military school was Georgia Military Academy at the age of 4.5. And I've posted a picture on Facebook of me in my uniform at that age. And people don't believe that, of course, and I don't blame them. How can a person be in a military school at that age? But I was, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. Really, I had a little falling out with Dad in about 1957. It happens in all families, and Smokey Unick was very disappointed in that, and I came out west here, away from where I left my heart in Georgia, and I became eventually a professor after being in the corporate world for quite some time, and wound up with some education and taught for 32 years. But, rather than to speak about myself, Webb, I personally would rather speak about my dad, who I believe a interest in would bring about a interest in what I believe is the primary focus of my effort, and that is to preserve and protect and advance the interest in racing history, which I think is an all-important factor for anybody in racing. And the reason for it is because racing is part of the American fabric that covers our country, and I think not enough has been paid attention to it because of various kinds of things, a failure on the part of the various venues such as NASCAR and USAC and the various other organizations who sponsor racing series. They have not given the fans the information that I think the fans need to keep an interest and preserve it. They have halls of fame, but true, they do, but they don't have a system whereby they can keep incorporating new members into them that should really be there. And it isn't just the NASCAR Hall of Fame; it's other halls of fame that exist, and fans are not informed appropriately or properly. Let's talk about Dad, if I may. Dad was born September the 22nd, 1904, in Washington, D.C., and he really grew up from early age as oddly enough, a childhood friend of William H.G. Big Bill France. They were childhood friends in Washington, D.C., and even my mother, Ruth Olivia Maddox Vogt, knew Bill France from a very early age. Dad went to work because of the conditions that existed at the time of the economy in the country, similar to what it is today, actually. There was a very tough economy, and Dad went to work for Universal Cadillac Corporation in Washington, D.C. at the age of 12 years old, very early. And he was a grease monkey, was the term for it. And his job was to go down into the hole that they used to drive cars over because they didn't have lifts at the time to raise the cars up. They just drove the cars over a hole in the ground and serviced the cars from beneath in that hole. And Dad's job was to go down and clean out the holes. And from the age of 12 until 16, he acquired enough knowledge, which was an early indication of what my dad was probably going to be capable of. He became the shop foreman at the age of 16. So that meant that he had already acquired sufficient amount of knowledge to tear an engine down, put it back together, and service all of the factors of certainly Cadillac automobiles at the time to do a complete job. Now, Universal Cadillac Corporation was actually a front business for Joseph Kennedy, and all of you know that Joseph Kennedy was our President Kennedy's father. And
a known bootlegger.
A known bootlegger, correct. Yeah, absolutely. And that's how the Kennedy family made all their millions. And so many of the people who worked in the Cadillac business there for Kennedy served as their trippers, or a bootlegger, if you will. That's the old term for a bootlegger. And Dad's bootlegging career started when he was 13. And his job was to go over to the New Jersey docks, where there was a Cadillac touring car with the big old, if most of you have seen them or know about them, where the big old traveling trunks were on the back of the car, these great big trunks that were designed to hold the people's belongings. And it was loaded with Canadian whiskey that had been brought in by boat and unloaded on the New Jersey docks. So his job was to go over, get in the Cadillac, keys were already in it, drive the car from the New Jersey docks to, I always, when I tell this story, I used to tell it to my students and to anybody that was interested. Now, remember, he lived and worked in Washington, D.C., where do you suppose he drove that Cadillac loaded with Canadian high-grade whiskey?
Don't tell
what
me
was his destination?
Don't tell me the White House.
Yes, it was. Exactly correct. You're one of the few people that ever get that correct. To the west entrance of the White House. Twice a week. And Dad got $100 every time he did that. And back then, everyone understands that $100 was a lot of money. A lot of money. So Dad was pretty smart, at least in the sense that what he did with that money is he got himself a car or several cars actually, and he his term was hot rodded the cars, and he Model Ts and eventually Model A's, and he would hot rod the cars and build up the engines and redesign the suspension and so forth. And he would roar around Washington, D.C., up and down Pennsylvania Avenue and drive the cops there nuts.
Sound like
just
a
absolutely
boy.
Drive them nuts. And so he was a hellraiser from the word get-go. And he got a reputation of being able to build fast cars, and the connection that he had with Indianapolis is a little bit gray. How he actually wound up getting there is a little bit gray, but my research and the family stories tell me that Peter DiPaolo found him in Washington, D.C., and most of you know that Peter DiPaolo was a famous Indianapolis race car person. And eventually, Dad wound up in Indianapolis, and his late teens and early 20s, all the way until he was about 25, he built and even had some design capability Indianapolis race cars, and his primary expertise was in the Miller engines. Now, a lot of people don't know about Miller engines, and I think this is one of the issues, again, that I think the racing industry has failed to keep a bright and well-documented historic feature in front of the American public about the racing industry. Things like the Miller engine. The Miller engine was like a sewing machine. I mean, not to say that it was small in any way, but it was a very well designed, very precise, very detailed engine, and it was a tremendous piece of engineering. And Dad was able to make some design changes and some additional carburation, for instance, changes for the Miller engine that brought the speeds up rather dramatically. And Peter DiPaolo, as many people might remember, went on to a championship there. So Dad was very, very instrumental in Indianapolis racing. But during all this time, he was also making a name for himself in other venues of racing. He was building his own open-wheel race cars and racing them on of course, the dirt tracks, pretty much all dirt tracks at the time, except for what I'm going to mention in a minute, the board tracks. But he was racing all around in New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, in the northeastern states, all over the place, and the very small quarter-mile, half-mile dirt tracks that existed there, and making a name for himself. He lost his teeth in an accident in Trenton, New Jersey, on a dirt track, a half-mile dirt track, where he went through a area where one of the famous drivers at the time had gone through the fence and had left a board hanging out when he had gone through the fence, and Dad came around, and there was so much dirt and dust that he couldn't see, and he drove right off the track, and the board cleared Dad's windshield and smacked him right in the face and busted all of his teeth out. And so Dad had a few issues at the time. Dad also was a champion Indian motorcycle racer. He won the Indian motorcycle board track championship on the board tracks for 4 years in a row. And this is where he met my mother, actually, who was on a volunteer on a medical team. My mother came from a very, very wealthy family in Maryland, in Silver Springs, Maryland, and tell you how wealthy they were. They had the very first automobile in the state of Maryland. They were able to afford to buy the very first automobile that was owned in the state of Maryland. And my mother was quite enthralled with the idea of speed and the thrilling display of it, and she would go to the races and sneak around, and she was a wild child in the family, and she would sneak around and get out and go to these places, and much to the disapproval of her family, and they just didn't care for it at all. And so in order to get into the board track races where the motorcycles were being raced, she volunteered to go in on a medical team because she had some medical training as a nurse. And the last time my father drove on a board track was the first race of a new season, and he had on the leather, brand spanking new leather driving suit that he had been awarded from the previous season as the champion, and a brand new pair of leather boots and so forth, and he had a brand new Indian motorcycle that he had built and so forth, and make a long story short, he was roaring around the track at about 120 miles an hour, and a lot of people don't realize those motorcycles were very, very, very fast on those tracks, and a lot of people were killed on board tracks, and that's why they eventually closed them down, because of so many fatalities. But Dad came roaring around, and his sprocket locked up. And, well, of course, everybody could understand that when a sprocket locks up on a motorcycle, why the rider keeps going and the motorcycle stops. For all intents and purposes, Dad kept flying down the track, and the motorcycle skidded off and up and off the track. And Dad wound up, my mother said, with his left boot on, a piece of his underwear, and the left sleeve of his riding suit, and about 500 splinters in his body, and everybody would have been horrified to see my father's body from all the scars that he had on it, from the damage he had from splinters from not only his motorcycle days but his open wheel days on the board tracks, because those guys came away with splinters poking in him all over the place. So that was his last days, and that's how my mother actually met my father. But she had already really fallen in love with this big red-headed guy, 6'5" guy that was a strapping guy, a handsome fellow, and so she met him, and she went to the hospital, much to the disapproval of her family, and one thing led to another, and they got married, and her family disowned her, because she married this greasy mechanic, hellraiser motorcycle rider, and instead of doing what she was supposed to do, but which was continue on with a glorified life, because she had a master's degree in French from the Columbia University and master's degree in business. So if anybody would want to know that the early part of Dad's career in terms of trying to put together a racing organization down in Georgia, my mother had an awful lot to do with it.
Well,
because my dad had less than a fifth grade education, and my mother was brilliant. She was a brilliant woman.
So moving our way down south here, there's a book out, and I think the gentleman who wrote the book is Neil Thompson, Riding with the Devil.
Correct.
And in the book, it spoke about your old man being down in northeast Alabama, actually, for the people listening locally, and throughout the South. He ran at Birmingham. He tried running somewhere in northeast Alabama. The book says Gadsden.
That's correct.
I live in Gadsden, Alabama. It must be misspelled in the book because I don't know that there's another town called Gadsden with S-E-N. But anyhow, Raymond Parks. How does your father, Red Vogt, and Raymond Parks figure in to what is now stock car racing in the South? And tell who Raymond Parks is to our listeners.
Well, I tell you, Neil Thompson's book is probably the definitive book right now on NASCAR and how it got started. Neil did a superb job putting together that book. There are misstatements in it. None of which are Neil's fault. He was told things by people who they believed in good faith were correct. Somebody told them something, and they believed that that person who told them knew what they were talking about, and so they told Neil the story. And
so now, reading between the lines, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but reading between the lines with what you just said, that you're saying that people within NASCAR or friends of NASCAR, somebody to do with NASCAR, told him what the history should read instead of what he found? Is that maybe what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, verbal history. I at the inaugural opening of the Georgia Racing Hall of Fame a few years ago, my opening remarks were to the point of verbal history. Verbal history is a disaster. Everybody knows that if you tell a story to somebody and then they turn around and tell it to somebody else, by the time it gets to the third person, that story has changed. And that's the problem with verbal history. And up until about 1948 or so, everything about NASCAR was verbal history. It was all just verbal. Nothing had been recorded. Nothing had been written down. It was all just somebody telling somebody that they read something somewhere, and then they would misquote it, and it would be carried forward, and it's become what my term for it is revisionist history. It's revising what really actually happened. Your question about Raymond and Dad and the whole issue of how did all that come about. Dad was hired by a fellow named Peachtree Williams, and he was controlling the bootleg industry at the time in 1929, in the late 20s. In Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and so on. He was hired to come down because of this reputation he had for being able to build fast cars, and most especially Fords. He was hired to come down to Georgia, Atlanta in particular, and build cars for Peachtree Williams. Well, he came down to Atlanta, and no sooner really did he get there than he recognized that there were already what were generally called cow pasture or horse pasture or cornfield racing going on where people were scraping out places in farmers' fields, and bootleggers and whoever, but primarily bootleggers, were running around these little short tracks and trying to see who had the fastest car. Well, the so-called farmer field racetracks, everybody in the South, all the way up to Virginia, West Virginia, and so forth, all the way through the Kentucky, Tennessee, North, South Carolina, lay claim to the first NASCAR race ever held was in their state at this place, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there probably could be a couple of hundred of those, you know, that somebody would claim as being the first race, right? Because that's the race they knew about. That's the only race they knew about, so they think, well, all right, that must have been the first one. Well, actually, the first real organized one that an organization that my father incorporated in Georgia in 1929 at the behest of my mother, who was the smart person, was held in Augusta, Georgia, in a farmer's field, if you will. The only reason it was called the first one is because NSCRA, the National Stock Car Racing Association, which, by the way, still exists, was the precursor. It was the forerunner of NASCAR. And let me explain this. Peachtree Williams had a bad accident. A huge garbage truck ran into his armored Cadillac. Very unfortunate. But gangsters and people of ill repute at that time had those kinds of accidents when somebody else wanted to take over their territory. So Peachtree Williams had an accident. Well, his control of the bootleg industry began to get split up into small entities. There were, everybody became the independent bootlegger. People like Junior Johnson and Curtis Turner and all these people who were in doing their own bootlegging began to come into being. Well, Raymond Parks already was a very well-known bootlegger up in Dawsonville, Georgia. His whole family, which is a very large family. Most people don't know how big that Parks family, or we call it the Park clan, is up and around in the mountains in Dawsonville, Georgia. They're big family. I call them cousins because Raymond Parks I called him Uncle Raymond. He was like an uncle to me. We're very close. Anyway, so Raymond knew about Dad and Dad was already building a few cars for him already at that time. And so Raymond's business began to really boom. And Raymond began to get trippers going all the way over to Alabama. And when you say that you mentioned Gadsden, Alabama, and so forth and so on, and there were races being run over there and so on and so forth, well, that's true. Raymond's business became known in a very wide range of places: Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, all up into the Carolinas and so forth. And so Raymond had a lot of guys working for him, running a bootleg all over the place. Red Byron ran bootleg for him. Red would come over to Atlanta, and he would pick up a transshipment. In other words, it would have been hauled down to Atlanta, and it would have been. I unloaded myself personally. Sometimes my brother would help, but most of the time my brother would never come down to the garage. He would always be hanging around my mother, but I would come down to the garage, and I helped unload the back of a trucker car from one car to Raymond. To Red Byron's car, and he would drive it over to Anniston, Alabama, where he lived. So Raymond was hauling for him. It was just that it's what people did back then, and so that's the connection between Raymond and my dad. They were friends. They were business partners, if you will, but then they became just fast friends. My connection with Raymond was very, very close. He was very much like a family member. Raymond told me any number of times that my father never had a cross word with him. Never. They never, ever had a disagreement about anything. Nothing. Raymond Parks trusted my father implicitly. When my father would do work for him, build a car, prepare a race car, whatever it was, and my father would hand him a bill for it, and it stated a certain amount of money, Raymond Parks never questioned it. He never, ever even questioned it. He trusted my father implicitly because he knew my mother was going to be making out the bill, and he knew that my father would tell my mother specifically exactly what he did and what it took to do it, and the bill would be totally honest, and they never had a disagreement, which I thought was remarkable because that was very unusual. Usually bootleggers back then were a little hard to get along with sometimes. I don't know, in the book, if you read Neil's book, you would have heard him talk about my mother being the bitch of Georgia. She carried a .45 automatic in her purse and also a .25 caliber automatic in her purse, and she knew how to use them. And she was a crack shot, and she was the bill collector.
So now that you mentioned the relationship, and to this day, relationships are important in auto racing. Mix in a little bit of the relationship between Big Bill France Sr., Raymond Parks, and your father, and was the relationships the same between your dad, Raymond, and Bill? Okay,
the answer to that is quickly, easily, no, because while there was a explicit, trusting friendship between Raymond Parks and my father, and even though my father grew up with and knew Bill France way before he knew Raymond Parks, they were buddies. That's true, but my mother never did trust Bill France. She never trusted the man ever, and constantly warned my father about. And I'm quoting here my mother, his character, and it really actually it was the actions of Bill France in Florida in December of 1947 in actually hiring Bill France as the first promoter of the newly reorganized NSCRA. because it was just simply NSCRA being reorganized to NASCAR, NASCAR. That happened in 1947, and a lot of people don't understand that. But when we walked out into the hallway after the meeting, because I was there, and I like to point that out, I was there. My mother told my father that she was divorcing him because of the fact that he included Bill France into the newly reorganized NSCRA, this new organization called NASCAR. And my mother told my father in the car on the way down to Daytona, when we were driving down there, that if he tried to include Bill France, that she was going to divorce him, and she did.
Now, okay, let's see. I'm trying to see, how do I frame this? Okay, so here we are, 2012. Bill France is the king of stock car racing, so to speak, historically. I mean, he is just the beloved Bill France by most accounts. What was it in 1947 that? What was his actions that molded those opinions your mother had of him? What was he doing that made that I don't know, I guess, but what was his actions that made him so untrustworthy as your mother claimed him to be?
Well, there was a fellow named Bill Tuthill, and a lot of people don't recognize Bill Tuthill's role because it's just never been talked about. But when NSCRA was reorganized in 1947 into NASCAR, Bill France was technically hired as the new promoter. However, the way history has been written to say that Bill France was made the president of the new organization, NASCAR. Now, nobody talks much about Bill Tuthill, who actually was the person who was a promoter of I think it was the NMA, National Motorcycle Association, up in the northeastern part of the United States many years ago. And he was also a very good friend of my father and Bill France. And the way he knew my father first because of my father's involvement in board track motorcycle racing. And my mother knew Bill Tuthill. And what my mother had found out was that Bill Tuthill and Bill France had met with Osinski, who was the Bill France's attorney, up in North Carolina at a hotel before the December 47 meetings in Florida, and had arranged an agreement to exclude my father from their efforts to take over the new organization. Now, let it be clearly understood that the whole thing from 1929 forward, would never have happened without one thing, and it's the critical thing in the whole process, and that is Raymond Parks. Without Raymond Parks, his money and his willingness to put that money forward and to bankroll my father, number one, okay, which I totally want understood is what what the relationship between Raymond Parks and my father. I mean, there was no question about it. but my father worked for that money.
Yeah, of course.
He worked for it.
Yes, sir.
But he bankrolled Bill France. Now Bill France, Annie France called my mother in. This is very convoluted, Webb, and I'm sorry, but it is. But it's very convoluted. It's very confusing.
This is good. This is good stuff, in my opinion.
Well, all right. Annie France in 1934, the worst year of the Depression, called my mother from Washington, D.C., and understand, of course, that my father had already opened his business, his 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week automotive business, the only one in the United States, in Atlanta, Georgia, and had been already open for 5 years at that time, and doing bootleg business and so forth and so on. Okay, so Annie France up in Washington, D.C., calls my mother and says, Ruth, Bill's been out of work for over a year now, and we're really in desperate shape. Can you help us out? So my mother, who was a wonderful person in terms of her a willingness to help people in need, and that is going to be a big part of my book, because I'm not going to inject here what she actually wound up doing, even for the black people that worked for my father, whom she put their children through college. But that's another story. But so she said, "Well, sure, Annie. You guys, I'll send you. I'll Western Union you, which was what they used back then, $500, which was a lot of money in 1934. You guys buy a car and then come on down here, and we'll put Bill to work."
So to put this into a good, colorful picture, by your accounts, the beloved man of NASCAR, Bill France's family, were homeless, or soon to be homeless.
Well, they wound up. Well, they might have been, except what actually happened was they came down from Washington, D.C., broke down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and called and said, "We broke down. Bill can't fix the car." And all that really was wrong with the car, and everybody says Bill France was a mechanic and he was a race car driver. BS. I'm sorry, he wasn't. The inside story that everybody that understands it knows that he had difficulty finding a broom in the shop, or using a screwdriver or a pair of pliers. But so what was really wrong with the car was a rotor broke. Big deal. The rotor broke. So come on. So my mom sends up two of the black guys with a wrecker up to Spartanburg, because they didn't know what was wrong with the car, to pick up the car. So they've hauled, little Billy was at that time already a little baby, and hauled Annie and little Billy and Bill down to Atlanta. Bill goes to work for my father, works for my father for a couple of years in Atlanta, right? Okay? Hooks up with, make a long story short, begins to understand and hook up with Raymond Parks, does some bootlegging for Raymond Parks, okay? Gains some confidence of Raymond Parks. Bill was a person who could do that. He was a person who could easily convince people that he was a person quite different than who he really was. Put it that way. And so actually Raymond Parks financed or bankrolled Bill France down to Daytona, to Ormond Beach, really. Okay? Bankrolled France down there because Raymond already owned about 6 miles of beach property on Daytona Beach already at that point, which, by the way, much of it, a lot of it, became what was then later the track at Daytona Beach track. Okay, that was the land that Raymond Parks owned. So Raymond wanted a representation, if you will, a foothold in Florida because he had some big plans down there. And so he sent Bill France down there and put him in a service station down there. I think it was a Standard, I'm not sure, Pure Oil or Standard or something like that. Standard Oil or Pure Oil station down there. So he opens up a little 2-pump station down there and puts him in it and bankrolls him down there. We used to, by the way, in Atlanta, I'll backtrack here a second. In Atlanta, when Bill France and Annie and little Billy got to Atlanta, they lived in our home in East Lake, right outside of Atlanta, which is now a part of Atlanta, but they lived in our home with us. They weren't homeless. They lived in our home. Mm-hmm. And our home, when it was sold, to tell you how big it was, our home was made into the East Lake Country Club.
So you had a nice place then.
Oh, I tell you it was. When you walked in the front door, it was like one of those it was a colonial home. You walked in the front door, and there was these huge winding staircases, one on the left and one on the right. It was like the ones you saw in Gone with the Wind, these huge staircases that went up to this huge balcony at the top, and there was the east wing and the west wing, and it was like, I don't know, I was a very young child at the time, but I wasn't there very long. I was put in a military school when I was 4.5 years old, so
well, hell, they had to make room. Had to make room for the Had to make room for the Francis.
Oh, no problem. I'll tell you how big it was. My father's sister, Aunt Jewel, and her husband, Uncle Joe, and my cousin Charlene lived there with us also. Okay, so it was no problem when the Francis came. They were living there also. So there was 3 families. There was Mom and Dad and myself and my brother and the Frances, the 3 of them, and then there was my aunt and her husband, Uncle Joe, and Charlene, their child.
So Raymond Parks puts Mr. Bill France Sr. in Florida in Ormond Beach, Daytona area. How soon after, which we know, 49, 50. So the Streamline Hotel.
Yes.
By your accounts, did that happen? Is that the meeting you were at?
Yes, I was there in November and December in 1947. I was there. Yes, I was 14 years old.
Gotcha. So,
and I was. People say, "Well, you're just a kid. What the hell do you know?" Well, I knew a lot because I was going to. I quite well understood what was going on. I was being educated in the finest schools in the country at the time. Georgia Military Academy, Florida Naval Academy. I went to Florida Naval Academy in St. Augustine, Florida. It's no longer there. It doesn't exist anymore. But, absolutely. Sure, I was a very smart young man,
So after this meeting, and I understand that there was stocks and this and that and what, how many years after the meeting, and we spoke offline, and not to jump forward or back or whatever in the story. I know it's the story's all over the place.
Yeah.
How far between the famous meeting at the Streamline Hotel and Bill France acquiring the stock? How much time? Because you said that he once he acquired all the stock, was the major stockholder in NASCAR. That's when the history got magically rewritten. What's the time period there?
About a couple of years, I'd say. From about 1947, when the stock was initially issued, France got some, Bill Tuthill got some, Raymond Parks got some. There were a few people sitting around the table, most of whom were bootleggers, put in their investments. It wasn't a whole lot of money. Raymond Parks got a lot. The records and the difficulty with this whole thing, Webb, is that since the France family has wholly owned NASCAR as a private corporation, you can't really find out how much original stock was owned by who or whom, if you will. There's no way to find out. So you don't know how many shares Bill Tuthill had, or how many shares Bill France had, or how many shares Raymond Parks had, or my dad had, or you really don't know. But they all had a considerable amount. The understanding that I had, which is a verbal understanding, and this I want to make clear, but it's a verbal understanding. So is it true? I don't know. And I clearly say I really don't know, because it's verbal, and who knows, But the verbal understanding I had was that the controlling interest was being held by Raymond Parks.
Now,
but I don't factually know that.
Okay. Now, when we started our conversation this evening, you made a comment, and we've spoke offline, and we've both talked about this, and we both agreed, preserving history is important, and that organizations and racing have Hall of Fames, and maybe the people correct me if I'm wrong, but was Raymond Parks in the inaugural class of the NASCAR Hall of Fame?
No.
Okay. Who helped Bill France in beginning fund prize money for our listeners out there?
Raymond Parks.
So,
Raymond Parks put up the money for all of the initial races. I would say that probably, and this is a guess, and I make it clear that it is, because there's really no way to find out. There's just simply no way to find out. And this is, again, verbal history. Big problem. But from what my mother told me, and she was a good source of information, God rest her soul, from what my mother told me, probably the first 100 races, 50, 75, 100 races, Raymond Parks put up the money.
So and here's the way I was getting this. That was a roundabout way of getting to this. Is NASCAR ignoring some of their past?
Oh, the answer to that is, in one word, is absolutely.
Then that's and now, but when you say, and when you talk NASCAR and you say bootlegger, the only one that comes to mind in the modern era would be Junior Johnson, of course.
Well, sure.
Yeah, and you'd have to dig a little deeper and find books and talk to people like you've done to really hear the story of Raymond Parks, Mr. Red Vogt, and all these, and Tuthill and all these other people. Let's see, what is of the character that you know of Bill France? Why would Bill France not include these other people in the history, and why would he? And I don't know. Why would he exclude them? Why would he not keep them in, and what would be the purpose of excluding them?
Well, mostly because he wanted to let himself be the primary focus of NASCAR. He wanted to be the shining light. He wanted to be the main idea of when somebody said NASCAR, they wouldn't think of anything illegal or any skullduggery or anything like that. They would think of Bill France. That's what he wanted. And the person, I think, primarily behind that is not only Bill France himself because of his own particular elitist character. He had an elitist character about him, but also Bill Tuthill. You see, when right after the organization was formed in 47, in 48 and 49 and 50, Bill France was out promoting, and what he was really, really good at was, in fact, promoting. He was his very best at promoting was himself. He was very good at that. He promoted himself, and no one needs to even question that. Look at what the results were. Just look at what he was able to do.
Yeah. So, and certainly your story is not to discredit any of his work that he's done, because obviously the French family, took NASCAR on and did wonderful things with it. We can both agree on that, right?
Absolutely. There's no question about. Well, for instance, my father, and I don't think Raymond Parks. I don't even think Bill Tuthill, although Bill Tuthill was a major player in the whole beginning, but I don't think really. Bill France did what he did was unquestionably nobody could have done what he did. None of the original players, most of all, including my father, could have done what Bill France did. No one should take away from Bill France the capability that he displayed in developing NASCAR. He did a wonderful job.
But all that you're asking of the NASCAR community is to present the history as it happened instead of as it was rewritten by your account. That's what we're saying.
Absolutely, yes. In other words, the truth is the truth, and that's all there is to it. No one should try to revise what really happened. What really happened is what really happened, not some made up or a story or some envisioning of something because it's grandiose or because it sounds good. Okay, who cares that there was? Obviously, the story that they don't want bootlegging to be a part of the history of NASCAR. Well, they don't seem to care that Junior Johnson gets a lot of publicity. So that's hypocrisy. That's absolute hypocrisy that they stand on one foot, but then speak about the other foot that's in the air. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth, and it's not fair to Raymond Parks, Raymond Parks should have been the first person in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Period. Absolutely, period. He is the person, should have been the first person. Not my father. Yes, it was my father's idea. That's true. But without Raymond Parks, my father's idea would have never gotten to first base. So I'm not saying that my father should have been the first person in there. Raymond Parks should be.
Well, moving forward, you've alluded to the fact that you are going to write and publish a book. What's the timeline on the rest of this story being put into a book form?
Well, I'm hoping for later this year that it can get into publication. I've had some serious problems with getting it completed. In an earthquake here in California about a little over a year and a half ago, probably almost now 2 years ago, I lost the first 8 chapters because of not only hard drive destruction because it fell off of my desk here in my home, but also the backup that was about 80 miles south of where I live that I had to protect the documentation. They lost all of their hard drives in their business down there. Well, I lost the first 8 chapters, and I've had a terrible time reconstructing all of that. So it's really delayed the publication for at least a year and a half or almost 2 years. So it's been a struggle. And I've had some, the old writer block things, and I've had some personal issues that have interfered. But I would hope for later this year. I can't give you a specific, but later this year.
Well, that's fine. We'll have you back on when there's a release. Well, Mr. Vogt, from prior conversations, Red, from prior conversations that I try to preserve the history too of the sport, and I appreciate the history of the sport. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing part of your story. I understand you can't tell everything, but providing that angle when everybody sits down on Sunday and turns on NASCAR. I know my dirt track fans don't like NASCAR, so they say. They still turn it on, I'm sure. I want you to think back to this interview and think of the bootleggers who so willfully formed this sport for us and aren't getting credit for it. In closing, Red, what do you have to say?
Well, I just want to express my appreciation, and one of the first things I always try to do when I talk about racing is express my appreciation for fans. There are two things that need to be in place before racing can ever be successful, and that is a fan who is an appreciation of speed and the display that it puts on for them. And the people who go out there who sometimes sacrifice food on the table to get their cars on the track, and all the volunteers that come out and work on the cars, and the people that are doing the racing, they understand what goes on, and the late nights and working all night on the cars, and I don't care if you're working on a local quarter-mile dirt track. I don't care how small the venue is. It doesn't matter. I got started on a little Peach Bowl Speedway quarter-mile track, just like the one locally here in the town where I live. They're all important. Every dirt track in this country that exists is a critical element in the development of racing. And if you're going to learn how to drive, you got to drive on a dirt track. You got to do that. You can't skip it. You can't not do that. You have to learn how to control a car on a dirt track. So I am a firm, absolute believer in anybody that wants to learn about racing is to get out there on a dirt track and learn how to control a car and stay out of trouble and get to that checkered flag.
Well, Red, I hope that we've talked now 2 or 3 different times. I hope that on a personal level we developed a sort of a friendship. I look forward to maintaining that friendship with you. When the book gets ready to be published, you're welcome to come back on the show, promote the book, and maybe tell us another inside story or two. But we're going to try to keep the fire alive as far as just maintaining historical stuff in our sport. I mean, I told you I got a IndyCar tire at 60 years old, been in the family 60 years, sitting here in my office. I got my family's Indy 500 badges from working out there. So no matter if it's your door off your dirt car or a lug nut off your granddaddy's race car from the 60s, it's all important. We need to save it. Stories are the same way. If we don't get them out there, don't record them, nobody gets to know about them. We lose them.
You got it, Webb. We're not for people like you who are making the effort to take opportunities to let people know about what's going on and to keep them informed. Then we're going to lose it. So you are a major key, and it's appreciated.
All right, not a problem. Anytime I can sit and talk racing. I can make my wife frown at the same time. But, Red, I appreciate you, and hope to have you back sometime.
Well, anytime. I'll be happy to come back and join you. I love to talk about racing and support the fans and support the sport.
All right, Mr. Red Vogt, son of the legendary foul-mouth mechanic, one of the forefathers of of what we know to be NASCAR racing. Red, good talking to you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
We'll be.
Well, all right, race fans, we're gonna shut it down for the evening. I didn't mean to. I accidentally hit that button. I'm sorry, Red. I didn't mean to do that. Well, I'd like to thank our guest tonight, Mr. Jesse Stovall, the winner of the Pelican 100 at Arklatex Speedway. Zach, if you're listening, sorry I couldn't get you on, brother, but you had a bad connection, and it was not. I don't know if you had the computer on or what you had, but we had a bad connection, man. I'd like to thank Mr. Red Vogt for offering his spin, his family spin, his recollection of the beginnings of NASCAR. We're not here to confirm or refute, but I thought it was a good story worth sharing with everybody. Well, all right. I don't know what happened to Brian Gray. Kyle May left me too, so for everybody here at In the Dirt, thank you for listening, and we'll see y'all or talk to y'all next week.